Bum bum bum, literature gets a look. Legs talk about books. And welcome back to Legs Talk About Books, the monthly literature podcast where we talk about books. I'm your host, Hardleg Joe. Joining me today, the OG co-host, CB Radio.
The B stands for books.
The B stands for, what does the C stand for?
The B stands for books.
But yes, introductions aside, today we're looking at Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb, which is book 1 in the Live Ship Traders, which is also book 4 of some bigger series. Robin Hobb has written a lot of different books. They all take place in the same universe, but they come in like separate trilogies that are unrelated from each other. So, like, even though this is the 4th book in that universe, you don't have to have read the first trilogy to understand it. This takes place, from what I understand, on a completely different continent, and has an entirely different set of characters. It's about, you want to give, like, a back of the cover, like, synopsis, spoiler-free, for those who haven't read it yet.
A synopsis, okay. In a world,
in a world of endless ocean.
Yeah. Oh, no, we're not doing Waterworld.
That's how Mega Man Legends starts out. I've been playing that on the Gameplay channel. Check that out. Check out Legs Play if you haven't.
Nice little plug there. But essentially, in this story, a ship captain is dying, and you take the position of following the daughter of said ship captain, the wife of said ship captain.
Just, you follow this family.
You follow the family of
it. And the captain, the main guy, dies, and then everything is thrown into chaos because of it. And, yeah, I guess the important thing, the reason why it's a ship of magic, is because this isn't just any captain. He owns a live ship, which are these magical ships that take, like, 3 generations to quicken, they're called.
I'm alive.
Yeah, the ships come alive, the figurehead.
Hence the name.
Yeah, the figurehead, the little creature or whatever's on the front. They're always people, I think they don't have to be. They talk a little bit about other ships, but I assume that one could be like a wolfman or maybe like a mermaid or something. I don't know.
But I feel like it would be easier for the people on the ship to talk to a human
person, as
opposed to, hey, it's the goblin ship. Why does no one get on the goblin ship? Everyone's afraid of the goblin ship. I don't care.
But yeah, the figurehead comes alive. It helps you with sailing. The ships themselves are made out of a material called wizard wood, which I don't really like that name, because there's no wizards in this.
Well, there's a lot of names in this that are just very...
We're getting off track, though.
Yeah.
It's made of wizard wood. The ship itself is really sturdy. It's immune to, like, break down. It doesn't need maintenance. Barnacles don't nest on it and stuff like that. And they can basically trade better than any other ships. They have an effective monopoly on a certain area. There's only, like, 30 live ships, and there'll never be any more as far as we know. Well, plus they take, like, 3 generations before they become good, and even then, at the start of this book, they're still trying to pay off the live ship.
Yeah.
After 3 generations.
It's like owning a house as a millennial.
Maybe your grandchildren will pay off this house. Thanks, inflation. But yeah, it's telling that we started by talking about the family drama, because even though there is an element of magic in here, it's kind of understated. This is really much more of a character-driven story about this family dealing with upheaval, not just within from someone else taking over the ship and the death of a family member, but also from society in general. There's sort of this subsection about slavery is becoming a thing, and the people in this town, called Bingtown, by the way.
Another one of the names I don't
really dumb name, Bingtown. Like, really? You gonna be a search engine or something?
Yeah.
I mean, this was decades before, but still, Bingtown, it just... Whatever. I digress. Slavery is becoming a thing in Bingtown. Even though it's illegal, there are other traders moving in. The whole area itself is owned by this, what's called the Satrap, or you think...
Satrap is what they said. I go audiobook, so I'm gonna have it said different ways.
Yeah, they have a god called
Sar.
Weird. Yeah, so they pronounced it Sar, but it's written just S-A, so I always thought it was Sa.
That probably go for that Sa.
The Satrap, the Sartrap, whatever. Kind of like a medieval pope, like part religious leader, part king. And just like the medieval pope, someone really corrupt got in the position, and things are not working out very well.
Everything's going to hell.
Everything's going downhill, so it's a lot of dealing with that. I meant to do a quick synopsis. This was a lot more.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a very dense story.
Yeah, and usually when we do this, we like to give, like, recommendations. What did we think about it? Did we enjoy it? And usually that's a lot simpler, but this one, at least for me, is a lot more complex of a case. Because there are some things that this book does really well. I really liked some of the world building. Their religion, the thing based around Sa or Sar is really good. The characters, some of them are really complex and nuanced. Others not so much, I feel like, but we'll get to that.
Mm-hmm.
They deal with loss really well, the changing times. I really understood, like, the pressures from a big trading family where all the other families have slaves, and suddenly they're making way more profits, and it's hard to keep up. Like, I understand the pressure to want to do something immoral for the sake of not falling behind the times. It's one thing to be like, oh, I would never do slavery, and it's another thing where, like, well, if you don't, then you could go into debt, and then your family could be sold into slavery. Suddenly it becomes a little bit more of a nuanced
It's a much
issue.
more us or them kind of situation, as opposed to Mistborn, where it was just kind of like, they're slaves.
Yeah, Mistborn, we did that earlier, and one of our big problems with Mistborn, or at least my big, I forget did you like that?
I liked that it had the feeling of the oppression of it, but the
mechanics of it
is like, you
didn't understand how this society with slavery came into being. In this book, it's really clear how it happened and how it's spreading and why it's becoming such a problem that it is. And
other than the fact that it's slavery.
Yeah, they handle it really well. At the same time, though, I feel like there's a lot of stuff in this book that doesn't need to be in there. There's a lot of extraneous stuff. Book feels overly long, in my opinion. You probably could have cut out, like, almost a fourth of it.
Yeah, there's like 4 or 5 chapters that did not need to happen.
Not need to happen
that we'll get to in a bit. Admittedly, this is probably something...
They're probably setting up something for a later book.
And it does feel like that at points.
Yeah, which we'll get to that in a moment. But as far as my review, I would say if you like family drama or sailing, if you like books that deal with, like, very real problems, but in, like, a fantasy setting, if you like the sort of Game of Thrones style fantasy, where it's just about character interactions and how they deal with it, but you don't want something as dark as Game of Thrones. Like, this has some dark moments, but there's not, like, nearly as much murder. It has a little bit of a more hopeful air to it overall, that, like, maybe things will turn out alright. Not everyone is, like, completely self-interested.
Not every ending in the book is just like, and then thus my troubles began.
Yeah, so if you're into that, if you're into the big character stuff, definitely check this out. Otherwise, if you're looking for more something that has, like, a lived-in unique world and a whole bunch of magic exploration and, like, big fantasy adventure, probably not for you.
I would actually, on that last point, probably debate it a little bit, because the hooks that it put down really got me interested in the series, which is hard, because I'm like that other person you were talking about there, where it's just like, I want to see swords and magic and a dragon flying out of nowhere and brah, and then this one it was just like, and then Althea realized that she was not as good as she thought she was, and you're like, you
really want to see what happens to the characters.
Yeah, I'm just like, I'm in for these people. Let's do this.
Brandon's usually more into, like, escapist stuff, which, again, I still feel like this is more like escapist fantasy. It doesn't have any, like, super interesting themes, the kind of stuff that I like. It has a little bit to say about religion, but that doesn't feel like a central tenet of it. It's like one character's side story.
It's like escapist people therapy.
But yeah, you really liked this book. You're going to be checking out the second one, most likely.
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt that it was one of the longer reads, so it took more to seep into me, kind of, unlike the other books that we had where it was just like popcorn, where it's just one and done.
I did look up some reviews for this, and a lot of people say, like, you know, the first half of the book is a whole lot of build-up, a whole lot of explaining and meeting the characters, but it comes together in the last couple chapters where it's very satisfying.
Yes.
I didn't really feel as much, but obviously you did, and it made you want to go into the second one. Me, I won't be reading the second one. I'm not going to be looking up spoilers, though. I'm going to let Brandon explain it to me. Maybe if it's really great, we can have a reverse of the Wheel of Time, where you come here and explain what happened in the next live ship traders.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's our spoiler-free thoughts on it. If you haven't checked out the book and anything we said caught your interest, go ahead and check it out. Again, by Robin Hobb. Very, very well written, if nothing else. Didn't find, like, any, like, huge flaws. Maybe a little overwritten, but that's not really a problem as far as I'm concerned.
If you want to do that, feel free. Pause the video now. Go read the book.
Go check it out, as you get the audiobook pretty easily. And then come back, because from here on in, we're just going to be talking about elements of the story with spoilers in mind, and just interesting things that this book did that maybe other books didn't do, or that it did uniquely. So starting off my first topic, more than any other book I've read, this feels like a prequel. Like, it's almost exclusively set up. None of the characters really get any resolution to their problems, except for Kenneth and kind of Winthrop.
And a little bit Althea.
Althena's arc is really weird, because she starts out really confident in her ability to sail, and she gets kicked off the ship, joins another ship, realizes she wasn't as good, but then by the end she gets good and becomes confident, so she's back where she started. She's just actually good instead of just thinking she was good. Although the fact that she survived on this ship, which is way harsher than the live ship she was on, the ship she joins is like it's like a whaling vessel,
a hunting ship,
hunting ship. And they're going way up north where it's frozen. They have to pack it full of meat so that it's like there's nowhere to sleep, and there are serpents everywhere, and like half the crew dies during the course of it from various things. It's like a very brutal, it's kind of like being a crab fisherman.
Yeah.
It's like very, very dangerous.
I'd still put it more closely to like whale fishermen, because crab fishermen can die during the storm. Whale fishers just die like doing their job sometimes.
Yeah. Well, crab fishermen, that's one of the modern day examples.
Yeah.
Like, modern day crab fishing is one of the most dangerous jobs you can do. Has like a high mortality rate compared to other stuff, but it pays really, really well.
Oh, yeah.
And that's basically what this is. It's like, you go for a season and try to make enough money that you could live for the rest of the year.
To the point where you could be a debtor who could possibly have been a slave. You'd be a slave on the ship for one season.
And
you're
good.
good.
You could pay off the entire price of what they would have paid for you as a slave.
That's like really good, but you're most likely to die.
Yeah, if you survive, that's the big thing. If you survive, your debts are wiped clean. So I was gonna say, given all that, it feels like she was a good sailor to begin with. The only reason she doubted herself is because she put herself in a much harsher situation than she ever would have had to deal with. I feel like if she had stayed on the ship, she would have learned that same lesson without having to be kicked off of it.
Yeah, admittedly.
So it's kind of a weird arc. Again, it's not really an arc because she ends up in the same place she started. She's just slightly more talented because of it.
And on a different live ship, but...
Yeah. Well, the other thing, too, is that, like, not the reason she went on that ship was to prove herself so that she could get her live ship back. And because of the way this book ends, that ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, that is not gonna happen.
I have to prove myself to Kyle. Like, well, you probably would have, except for Kyle don't own the ship no more.
And Kyle probably gonna die, which brings us to another point.
I hope. No, I still have more stuff to talk about with this prequel thing.
Okay.
Because that's the thing, is like, and this is something we'll get into next month. I'm doing the third and fourth books of Wheel of Time. And one of the things I wanted to talk about with that was how much, after reading the third and fourth books, the first one feels like a prequel. Like it's
then, but not when you were reading it.
Yeah. The Eye of the Storm still had, like, a conclusion. Like, it had, like, everything comes to an arc. If I wanted to stop reading there, I could have done it. Or even, like, Game of Thrones is another good example.
I was gonna say, the Furies one does that too, where it's like, it's a self-contained story.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think of an example of, like, you know, Game of Thrones clearly doesn't end with the story ending. There's clearly more happening. But because it starts with Ned Stark and it ends with Ned Stark, like his
bad end.
Yeah, his bad end. It feels like you followed an arc from start to beginning. Even though it's clearly setting up more, even though, like, Daenerys had literally nothing to do with anything.
Yeah.
It's just like, and meanwhile, halfway across the world, even she had an arc. Like, she had an arc that she went through and everything. So, it feels satisfying to finish that book. It doesn't really feel as satisfying to finish this book, because no one had, like, mini arcs. No one had, like, an end to their I guess Althena kinda did, but
yeah.
She was still in the midst of trying to accomplish whatever she did.
And essentially, the Daenerys of this book are snakes, or these serpents.
Yeah.
They have this small little, like, role that they play, but they literally bring nothing to the story other than flavor for the rest of the world.
Yeah, that was one of your big problems, is you didn't really like the serpent chapters.
Yeah, the serpent chapters were just kind of like, oh yeah, they're serpents, they talk about the plenty and the lack, we have no idea what the frick that is.
Oh, you didn't
Oh no, I got that by the end of it, but when you're reading it, like, they're just...
I kind of understood, like, granted, because I'm reading, I can sort of go back and, like, reread stuff, whereas you're on an audiobook, so you're being dragged along or whatever.
Yeah.
But you kind of figure out, like, oh, the plenty is what they call the ocean, and the lack is, like, the air.
Oh, I figured as much on that, but they also didn't, like, you could literally, like, carterize them from the story, and then you're good.
Yeah, they literally had nothing to do with, like, anything other than, like, maybe kind of building up the fact that Wizardwood might be related to the serpent somehow.
And then there's just, like, so much stuff feels like it's setting the foundation for another story, like you said, for it being a prequel.
Yeah, it feels too much like a prequel to the point that, like, it's not worth reading unless you're dedicated to doing all three.
Yeah.
And that can be kind of a big investment.
Because this is, like we said, it's a very dense book.
Yeah.
It's gonna start off being really, really, like, slow and very methodical at the beginning because it deals with characters.
Yeah, and it really wants you to know these characters without sort of telling you about it. But that's one of those things is, like, I feel like even though you want to show, don't tell, there are times when you can tell.
You could,
There are things that, like, you could have cut out most or half of Althea's whaling adventure. I forget what they actually hunted, because they mentioned, like, sometimes they would hunt these creatures in the water, but mostly it was, they went to this island and they killed these, like, walrus
Yeah,
things.
I was just gonna say walrus creatures.
Yeah, I forget exactly what they called them, but there's a whole chapter of, like, you go there, and then the archers kill them, and then they have to skin them, and then they talk about how they salt them, and roll them up, and roll them back into the ship, and there's all this stuff about how this works, and it's not interesting or important to the story. Or same thing, like, you start with Winthrop as a priest, and I guess it's kind of good to set it up, but you could have almost just, like, started with him at the place and sort of explained his priest stuff as a backstory.
Actually, no, I like that part was starting to describe him as a priest because you felt tranquil when he was talking about stuff. You got when he's making the stained glass at the very beginning, you get this feeling of a deep peace and a comfort there. And then you see him talk to his friend, and it's very comforting. And then once he's pulled away from that, and you see him getting put more and more to this position that is completely diametrically opposed to what exactly he was living in
basically
before.
Being forced to be a sailor.
Yeah, all that.
Because
you get
of
that,
Kyle!
Which we'll get to that. I got the feeling of longing from Winthrop in that, from specifically hearing that part of it.
I could see how you might want to include that, but I still don't feel like it was absolutely necessary.
No.
If you wanted to trim some stuff, you probably could have trimmed some of that. Half the stuff with Paragon. Which Paragon, one of my favorite characters. He's a live ship that basically went crazy.
And they don't tell you exactly how, but you're getting little pieces.
You get little pieces, and every time you talk with Paragon, it's super interesting. Because he's, like, washed up on the shore like a derelict, and his figurehead is, like, this big, strong, burly-looking man with, like, long hair and a big beard. Except someone took a hatchet to him. So he's got, like, all these chips and pieces missing from him, and they've actually cut out his eyes. He's just got a wedge out of his face where his eyes used to be, and all these, like, hatchet marks. And it's this big mystery of, like, how did this great grand live ship, like, did he turn against the crew? Did the crew turn against him? Like, what happened? This is super interesting.
Also, another interesting part about him is that he's this big, burly man, but he's also, like, he shows such childish behavior in certain points.
Yeah. Well, the way the ships quicken, for those of you who didn't quite read everything, or maybe didn't pay as much attention, is the captains of the ships have to die on the ships. And then something about their essence, they mention that, like, magic has a cost, and then Winthrop says that, like, Sa doesn't abide by magic where you have to kill someone. Which sort of implies that there is, magic has that kind of cost. And they get around it by, you know, his dad is naturally dying, so it's okay.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the captains, that's why they take 3 generations to quicken. You have to wait for these captains to die. But when they do, the ships get, like, all their knowledge.
And all of their kind of personality and...
Yeah, a little bit of their personality. They're kind of their own people.
Yeah, it's kind of like a kid, where you get, like, these 3 people have come together to make a child, and this person is its own being, but it's got a mixture of all of them.
That's why they're so great at sailing, because they have all the sailing knowledge of, like, 3 generations of ship captains.
And, spoiler, a little extra knowledge about going up the Rainwild, which is super weird.
But, hey, with Paragon, like, his first captain, really great guy, except for he didn't have time for his son, because his son was like, I'm going to pay off the ship early by overloading it with a whole bunch of stuff and taking a lot of risks. And he brought his, like, 10-year-old son along with him. One day, Paragon doesn't return from a voyage, and they're like, oh no, what happened? And then they find him, and the crew is dead, he's like upside down, and the captain and his son are both like chained to the mast, trying to stop from a storm or something. They said their bodies were still chained there.
Oh yeah.
And the live ship had quickened. And the live ship was talking in the son's voice, the 10-year-old voice.
Yeah, which is super disturbing.
Yeah. But they're like, eventually he got a more manly voice. But it's this idea that, like, most live ships are 3 lifetimes of experienced sea captains.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one good captain, a very brash and risky captain, and his scared 10-year-old son. Like, he'll talk like really...
Yes,
like,
why are you doing this and this and thus?
And then he'll suddenly sort of like get really scared like a child or like throw a tantrum or something like that. Which again, super interesting, except it goes nowhere. Like, I knew it had to be there because it establishes what bad can happen to a live ship, what are the risks, like why Kyle shouldn't be in charge of a live ship. But then after that, there's like, oh, he meets this other woman that's like a side character, and she sort of like talks to him and treats him nice. And it's really interesting. But by the end of the book, it's like, and then she's like, I might buy you.
And that's only interesting even further if you know that the next book is called The Mad Ship, which he is considered. So you know it has something to do with him.
So yeah, I guess it might do something to do with him. That's, if you want to read the next book, it's like, hey, you know, Paragon's a main character, possibly. See, it's called Mad Ship. The Mad Ship could refer to Vivacia just as well.
Going full batshit, yeah.
But, Mad Ship could be either one.
But yeah, no, that's why it felt like it was like this feels like the build up for a franchise. Which it's like going to see was it The Force Awakens, where you're like, oh, that was fun. And we know that there's going to be another one coming, so that'll be good. Yeah.
Well, no, again, because that's the thing, is like, this wasn't really satisfying to me. I didn't really like the ending. Plus, I kind of like saw it like a mile away. As soon as Kenneth's a pirate, and he's like, I want to take a live ship, and his crew, member's like, I want to take slaver ships. He's like, okay, we'll trade off, we'll do one of each. And then Kyle's like, I want to turn this live ship into a slaver ship. Everyone's like, don't do that. That's a terrible idea.
Legitimately the worst thing you could do to
live ships can feel the emotions of the crew on board, so if you bring a bunch of slaves on board, you could drive them crazy. They won't sail, they'll be really slow. And I'm like, Kenneth's going to capture that ship.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, like, how it was going to happen, and it didn't happen the way I thought it was going to happen, which is interesting.
Yeah, not exactly. I wonder if it could have without, like, the slave rebellion and stuff like that.
But that brings us to our biggest talking point.
Yeah.
If you guys are ready, time for the debate.
Fucking Kyle!
We both hate him. Let's put that out there. He is a legitimately... If he were a person, I would punch him in the face.
Yeah. I'm not a violent man, but I would kill Kyle if given the chance. It was so weird to me, because I am usually very much this guy who's like, no unjust death, even if they're bad, they don't deserve to die. And at the end, I just found myself like, please kill Kyle, for the love of God. Half the reason I'm not reading the second book is because Kyle somehow fucking survives when every other character on this ship is dead.
I'm a hopeful person. I'm listening for this, and I'm just like, don't let him die. Don't let him die before he can learn how big of a frickin' idiot he is. If we can't tell him, we don't like Kyle.
We don't like Kyle, and it's the worst thing about him. Well, not the worst thing. A big thing. Yeah, it's hard to say anything is the worst thing about him.
His first red flag.
His first red flag is that his name is fucking Kyle. And if you haven't been paying attention, this is a fantasy story where we have Kennets and Winthropes and Althea and Ronica, and then Kyle just out of nowhere. This like 90s ass name coming down here. Captain Kyle running around with his dick in his pants, just doing all sorts of shit.
If any of our viewers are named Kyle, we do apologize at this point, but it's just
I don't apologize. You need to get an apology from Robin Hobb for ruining your name forever.
Yeah, but no,
I will never look at Kyle's again.
Here are the two talking points. Joe is under the impression that he just didn't need to be in the story. He made the story objectively worse.
He is such a one-dimensional, like, character. He gets control of the ship, and he is both incompetent and arrogant. He's arrogant about his incompetence.
Mm-hmm.
If they had made him a really competent captain who was really good at his job, if some of the crew liked him at all...
Some of it did.
No one did.
Torg did.
Yeah, but Torg was an even bigger asshole than Kyle was.
I mean, admittedly, yes.
Torg was a sadist who literally delighted in hurting people, and he only liked Kyle because Kyle gave him the chance to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just debating your statement that everyone on the ship did not like him.
Okay, everyone disliked him except Torg, and everyone hated Torg too.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, literally no one agreed that what he was doing was a good idea. Like, half the crew left. The crew that stayed was like, this is not a good idea, but I get paid. I need to work the job, whatever, hopefully. No one was even slightly like, this might turn out right. They all thought this was a terrible idea.
And they paid for it, dearly.
He reminds me of all the worst managers I've ever had, where somehow they got power despite not knowing what they were doing.
Yes.
And I can't think of, like, a single redeeming quality of him.
Neither can I.
Yeah.
I can think of him as a redeeming quality in the sense that he does love his daughter. He does care about his kids. It's just that he is that kind of, that coach dad in the background. It's just like, why aren't you doing what I want you to do? Like, come on.
You're making me look bad by being bad at stuff. Oh, I saved a quote from Kyle to show how terrible he is. Kyle gets his priest son. He pulls him out of the priesthood, even though he promised to Saw that he would dedicate his firstborn child.
No, he didn't. His wife did.
His wife did, but yeah. He's going back on his wife's word. And his son is this weak, frail kid who knows nothing about sailing, not good at being a sailor, but he kicks off the former captain's first mate.
Who was actually a good sailor.
And what was it? He talks about, like, Kyle will put some cargo away, and then Brashen went and tried to, like, make it better because he didn't put it away right. And Kyle was like, you can't be, like, you're disrespecting me by doing things over again. You need to, like, if I say to do it this way, you do it this way. So he's like, okay. So then the next time Kyle puts some cargo away, Brashen just leaves it, and it falls over, and then he's like, if you saw that the cargo was gonna fall over, why didn't you go fix it? Like, that's like his first introduction, but he has this thing where he gets Winthrop, and everyone's trying to convince him that taking Winthrop aboard, that forcing his son to basically be a slave on this ship is a bad idea. And he says, you don't understand, Kyle said flatly. In a few days, he's going to be living aboard a ship where opinions don't matter unless they're mine.
Yeah.
That sums up his entire character. Opinions don't matter unless they're his. He is right, and even when he's wrong, he can't be wrong because that would make the captain look bad in the eyes of his men. Even though the men already hate him because he's stubborn like that.
Okay, I will say that a lot of them didn't like him. I wouldn't say the only people that really hated him were, like, Winthrop, because every reason was given to him. And some of the lower crew, yeah.
Here's the thing, I guess not everyone hated him, but every character that we were following the perspective of hated him. Like, Althea hated him, Brashen, Vivacia, Winthrop, Ronica, even his wife kind of hated him.
I wouldn't say she hated him, but she did not understand him. She was just, like, very... At one point in time, she has this turnaround moment of being like...
I don't know this man I married.
Yeah.
Which, that's the real crux of this. I wouldn't mind this character so much, except for the whole plot seems contrived where, like, okay, we have a captain who's completely incompetent, how do we get him in charge of something? And the idea seems to be two characters that we know are really smart and intelligent, for some reason decided to trust Kyle, and then as soon as he becomes captain, they both realize their mistakes. Well, and it's like, how did you come to this conclusion anyway?
They gave good reasoning behind that, though. They did give reasoning behind, are you talking about Ronica and Kefria?
Yeah.
Well, Kefria was blinded by them dick. She was actually, it was
For 15 years she was blinded by it!
Well, there's also the fact that Kyle was literally off sailing 90% of their marriage.
Yeah.
But Ronica was just, like, Ronica had very little dealings with him.
Yeah.
She just dealt with her husband. Her husband kind of vouched for him at points. And it was less that they didn't know him, it's that more, or that they were blinded by him. It was more that he was away so much that they just didn't get any information about him.
And see, that's the thing, is like, as much as this goes into backstory, I feel like the one thing it should have done is shown Kyle as being competent at some point, so we had some reason to believe that Ronica and Ephraim would trust him.
Again, early on in the book, they state that he was a captain of at least 3 ships.
Yeah.
Which does vouch that he was good. He just switched ships.
Yeah. But they're like, they didn't know him personally. And again, that's the thing, is being on a live ship is a completely different thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's like being like, oh, he passed his driver's exam, so he can be a NASCAR racer. Like, no. This is this takes entirely all this different knowledge that you're completely ignorant of. You don't understand, like, you understand cars, but you don't understand a Formula One race car.
Well, again, my thought process is that Kefria, not knowing her husband enough, kind of was just like, well, Kyle could do it. And then Kyle sails on the ship and gets confident to think that he could do it. And so Kefria and Kyle pretty much come to Ronica and say, hey, it seems that the captain, dad, I can't remember his name, Ephraim is not doing well, and you need to still be trading. I think that you should let Kyle take care of it. It doesn't seem that we should let this drug addict or...
The first mate who had been he's been on the ship for like 10 years, and everyone respects him, but they're like, oh, he used to be a drug addict, and he was disgraced part of this family like a long time ago.
It does haunt him like a cloud throughout most of it, and as soon as he gets off the ship, spoiler alert on this, he does go back to doing that. So it does imply that his character as a person is not the most stable.
I mean, he doesn't go right back to doing it.
He doesn't. It does take him about a year, but it's more along the lines of...
And he still doesn't do it while he's on watch. A man can have a little bit of Sinden on the side.
No,
it's fine.
No, it's not. We're not doing this. But no, it's essentially like... I could see why.
Here's the thing, though, is that you're speculating about all these, like, here's a very specific circumstance where this could have happened. And the thing that frustrates me... They
actually do say that a lot in the book, that it was a kind of a group effort from them, and that they were convinced, and then they convinced the father.
Yeah, but see, Kyle didn't play a part in that.
Mm.
Because Kyle wasn't around when the rest of them were around deciding this. They sort of decided while he was at sea that he would be the captain of the ship.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's like, they didn't check to see how he did with the crew, they didn't check to see how he went with Althena, and they're like, you have to have a blood relative on the live ship, so the fact that he has an instant dislike of Althena and doesn't think that women can sail, even though a woman was the first captain of the ship.
Yeah. Again, this is, it's all pretty much the idea that most of the bad decisions were made in an afternoon, and everybody has to live with it.
Yeah. And it just frustrates me that, like, Ronica, who is otherwise shown as this really calculating character, like, made a decision in an afternoon. It's just weird that, like, she would trust Kyle, who she didn't know very well, over, like, her own daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what my suggestion. Instead of Kyle being the son-in-law or whatever, or maybe he could even still be the son-in-law, but maybe he's, like, one of the people they owe money to, and he manages to get the ship because they're in debt.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he takes control of it for this thing because the captain can't. Like, if they had some reason where he forced himself into it, where he took the reins, that's the weirdest thing about it, is it never seemed like he was super driving to be in charge of the ship. He always makes a deal of like, you put me in charge of this ship, so I'm going to do the best for the family and save everything. I'm going to bail you out.
So he does what he thinks is what he should do. And
yeah.
if you look at his plans, financially, they're frickin' solid.
Yeah, it's just like he wants to put slaves on the live ship, and everyone who knows anything about live ships is like, that's a bad idea. And somehow, like, why is this guy who doesn't know the basics about live ships in charge of a live ship?
Again, it's all a bad matter of, we did something really dumb for an afternoon.
You know, if Kyle were slightly more incompetent, this could be a great comedy. Where you have, or like, if Vivacia and Winthrop weren't so put upon,
mm-hmm.
like if they weren't both literally, like, enslaved to Kyle, essentially, Like, this could have been hilarious, where, like, you just have Mr. Bean come on, take a live ship.
But that's why I'm excited for the next book, because at that point, you're gonna find that Kyle's gonna find out you're a dumbass. And I'm super excited for that. But I think we've talked long enough on this character that we shouldn't have wasted breath on.
I could talk about Kyle all day, baby.
But let's get to the other character that I equally find distasteful. Kenneth.
Oh, you didn't like Kenneth?
I don't like Kenneth for two reasons. Like, as a person, if he wasn't so frickin' lucky, I would find him to be interesting. But he's just a sociopath because he shows no empathy towards anyone. He shows no compassion towards any situation. And he is very, very good at manipulating things.
Yeah.
So he is essentially your textbook sociopath.
Which is interesting because I didn't know a whole bunch about sociopaths. And that's actually what I have written here is like, Kenneth's charisma is the weirdest thing to me. I can't tell if it's nuanced or inconsistent, because he knows so much about people in psychology that he's a master manipulator. Like, the crew is deadly loyal to him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everyone thinks, he always talks about, like, he has to hold himself this way or do this. He's everything Kyle wants to be. Where Kyle's like, I can't look bad in front of the crew or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Kenneth does that and he succeeds. And at the same time, he doesn't understand, like, basic human compassion.
I like that you have that completely in bold on your notes
Yeah,
here.
he doesn't understand why his crew is so happy to be freeing slaves, even though half the pirates are, like,
Actual
escaped
slaves. Yeah.
He frees a bunch of slaves, and he takes them to a former slave town that was started because of a slave rebellion, and he, like, brings them to this town, and then he goes into the town, and, like, everyone gathers around him, and he's like, are they going to lynch me? Like, his hand goes to his weapon, because he doesn't understand that they would be happy to see slaves freed.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, but I hate him dearly. I hate him so much in the deep of my heart. Everything that bad he does with his sociopathy is filled up by his luck. This luck that just follows him is just ridiculous.
Yeah, it helps that he learns that the people that the slaves that he saved were actually from the same village as the slaves who started that town by rebelling against the ship and founding the town.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, oh, all these people are actually our kin we thought we would never see. How did you know? And he's just like, a captain has his ways. Because he knows not to admit stuff.
And actually, with you saying what you said before, Kyle is not a sociopath, so it doesn't work for him because he's so guided by emotions. He's a very angry and wrathful guy who, if he doesn't get his way, he's just like an impetulant child and just outbursts on that. That's why he can't maintain being a good captain. But Kenneth, on the other hand, has no ties to emotion, and so thus, when something bad happens to him, he's able to think his way out of it.
I mean, Kenneth does still have emotions.
Yeah, he's still very much gets angry, but he doesn't.
It's weird, a lot of it feels like luck. Because
and he's
like,
driven, very driven.
Yeah, he's very driven. It's like he wants to react angrily, but then before he can, someone says something that makes him realize, like, oh, this is an opportunity for something else, and then he takes advantage of it.
That leads me to the best character in this book.
Well, I was just going to say, though, that's the thing about Kenneth. Kenneth is a great antagonist, because he's clearly the bad guy in this. Like, he is a pirate, he's stealing things, even if he does free slaves. And that's the thing, you understand his motivations. Like, I just don't understand Kyle. I don't have any interest in hearing about him.
I do understand Kyle, but I was going to say the best character in the book, his wrist thing.
Oh.
It's his conscience. It's his literal conscience.
Yeah, he has a little charm he made out of wizard wood.
His face is carved into it.
And he put it on a bracelet. And it speaks to him because it quickened at some point for some reason we don't understand.
Magic.
Which I guess, you want to talk about the magic? Because every other time we did a fantasy story, we've always talked about how, like, is this hard magic or soft magic? And I can't tell with this one.
This one's liquid magic.
It's really weird. Yeah, it does whatever the plot needs. Well, here's the thing. It's like, there are clearly defined rules about how the magic works. And there are clearly, like, costs associated with it. Like, the live ships to quicken need to have 3 deaths. The live ships have, like, these rules and everything about them. The Rainwild traders who provide all the magic stuff, they're like, they have to show up at night because they have horrible deformities. And have
and some of their vision is clouded because of, and it's just this.
They have all these things where it's like, you don't know exactly what, but you know that every time they do magic, it's corrupting their body. It has like a radiation to it that gives them tumors and stuff. And there's a reason why only they deal with magic stuff.
And even like characters who tangentially dealt with it, like there's a plague that came back when they went down there. That
the blood plague.
Like that's something that probably was tied to that magic. And
people think that and people mention like even the live ship traders, they have that curse. They only talk about it a few times.
But yeah, like every once
in a while, one of the children is born, and they're not human.
And you just get that feeling like, oh, that's very, very terrifying as a person.
The husband has to take it out back, and then you never see it again.
Admittedly, being like a pregnant woman in that world, just being like, oh, I'm so excited and afraid.
It could be a baby, or it could be a literal monster.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there are very harsh costs to it. But you never understand exactly what the costs are. Maybe they'll go into that further.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
We'll get back to that on the next one.
But then the other thing that's weird about it is that, like, you know, if it was just wizard wood, if that was the only magic, I could, like, understand. But like you mentioned, they have a fucking dream box that, like, someone's courting someone else. And as, like, a gift, they send them a dream box where you open it, and then you have a shared dream created by the two of you where you can have, like, a date night.
Mm-hmm.
Even though that's essentially it's just a date night.
Oh, God, that's so good. I'd never thought of it that way, but yes, I love that.
Yeah, they just go and they hang out and they have dinner and they chat for a little while. And they're like, oh, and they share, like, a little kiss, and it's, ooh.
Mm-hmm. And, yeah, it's just this idea that, like, the magic at times has this solidness to it, and then it just randomly, like, here we go, let's spin the wheel.
Yeah, or again, like, wizard wood, like, you build a ship out of it, the ship comes alive, it could talk to you. Can it build a charm out of it? It comes alive, it could talk to you. But they also mention, like, there's two women in the story who have, like, these belly button rings with a little, like, wizard wood charm on them. And they're like, oh yeah, by putting it there, it prevents you from getting pregnant and prevents you from getting any venereal diseases.
Which I can understand the venereal diseases because, like, on a live ship, the wizard wood does slightly prevent some diseases. Like, diseases don't spread as fast or other things like that. But, like, you ain't get babies, and they, like you were gonna say, like, they don't quicken. They don't start talking in the middle of... Admittedly, that would be very hard to describe as a horse. Just like, yeah, and then it just starts chatting and giving advice. Oh, that'd be very, very awkward.
Work the shaft, my dear!
Oh, God, no.
Well, I guess they don't carve them into, like, faces or anything, which makes me
they
wonder.
did for a skull. It's...
Oh, hers is a skull?
Yeah, it's a skull. So
okay, I don't remember. But that's not only does the belly button ring does something completely different from, like, the live ship, but then there's also the fact that, like, okay, if you make that and you make ships out of it, why not have, like, a wizard wood chair? Why not have, like, a wizard wood mug that you drink out of it and any medicine, like, heals you?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like there should be a lot more things. It feels almost like she wanted to have, like, characters who were having sexual relationships because, like, steamy romance and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's pirate times, and so that comes with all the ugliness of that, where they're like, yeah, they would be, like, shooting out babies everywhere and have, like, all the, like, she'd be a smelly pirate hooker with all these diseases, and we can't have that. She's gotta be a proper noble character. So it feels like she just invented this thing to, like, allow them to have everything.
But they did throw in some good dialogue about, like, why don't they just make chairs? And, like, the Rainwild traders are just, no, we can't do that.
No, but see, that's the thing, is, like, there's a part where they talk about chopping Paragon up and making, like, furniture and stuff out of him. And they say no, they wouldn't allow that. It's like, well, why do they allow the belly button rings? And what about other small stuff? Why not, like, an actual ring to, like, give you luck, or, I don't know, like a little trinket in your hand that lets you shoot fireballs or so. I don't know what wizard wood can do. I just feel like there should be more than 2 uses of it. It feels really contrived to just be like, yep, hooker rings and ships, and that's it. Nothing more. One of the 2.
Who knows? Maybe the dream boxes are made. No, they weren't made out of wizard wood. They
weren't. And they're like, not all their magic is wizard wood too, because they also talk about the
crystals. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they sort of describe them more as like glass beads that have a little flame inside of them, and they glow, and they're very.
Oh yeah. There's also like earring that's given to another character called Edda, and she just slowly becomes more feline because of it.
Well, that's the thing, is they describe her metaphorically as being more like a feline, but she's not like growing cat hairs or whiskers or anything.
But I'm sure it has some form of tangential magic towards it, because it's something that you're not...
I don't think that was magic. I think that was just like some sort of symbolism or something.
Well, I think it's actually magic because the thing that he took off there was they put it in there too much that you're not supposed to take crap from the treasure.
Yeah, I guess we should go, like, at the very beginning, it starts with Kenneth on this beach with the others, which are again, these weird fish people that live on this one isolated island.
Mm-hmm.
And on their beach, all this stuff wanders up. And they're like, you get your prophecy told by wandering along the beach, picking up so many things. 3 things?
I think 3 or 4,
3 or 4, and then you bring them to the others, and depending on what you picked, the others will tell your fortune. But then you have to put the objects back.
And you find the first time that Kenneth's an asshole where he just, like, shatters one of these amazing things just because...
He's like, I'm not giving it back. If I can't have it, then no one can have it.
And you're like, you're a dick.
Yeah. Well, one of the things he finds is a burlap sack full of dead kittens.
Which sounds like a horrid nightmare to me.
Yeah, and one of them has, like, an earring on it. And he gives the earring to Edda. And then they mention that, like, Edda is, like, his tigress who, like, prowls along the board and, like, strikes out for him and defends him like a mother lion. And
admittedly, yeah, as soon, like, before she gives her the earring, she's just this very meek and mild character. And throughout, after getting the earring, she just slowly grows this confidence in a kind of feral way. And that's what I'm saying.
She also grows the confidence by the fact that, like, Kenneth basically takes her out of the whorehouse and, like, lets her live on the ship.
Even before that, when they have their way with her in the
guys who are trying to kill Kenneth.
Yeah, she kind of just goes apeshit on one of them and literally, like, bashes his head into the ground.
Yeah, but I mean that could be understanding.
That can be understanding, but that's also, like, I feel like they're tied. I know it's it's not that big of a stretch, but it still feels very, like, symbolism-wise, that feels very...
Yeah, there's definitely some symbolism there, which you point, but I don't think it's, like, meant to be magic.
In this world, this book called Ship of Magic, I feel like there is some stuff on there.
But again, then you're sort of insinuating that, like, the ring will turn her into a cat.
Maybe, probably not. I don't know. It's that people turn into fish in this world, so we don't know. I'll read the second book and we'll get on that. But onto some themes that I kind of thought were really, really interesting about the book.
Yeah, because we've complained a lot, and there were some things that you liked about it.
Yeah, how they dealt with grief because of the captain father's Ephron's death does in fact affect almost all of the characters in the story very differently and in very...
Yeah, they handle really well just sort of like what it feels like to lose someone in a way that most fantasy books don't really handle very well. Like, going back to Game of Thrones, because it's a good example, is like, Ned Stark dies, and...
Spoiler!
Spoiler for the first book of Game of Thrones! Ned Stark dies, and then his family, like, they feel lost for him, but it's always just sort of like, it pains me that I can't be near him again, or just like, I'm sad. But they never they never say it as poetically or as... Painfully as they do here.
Like, Ronica just, like, she's looking out at her, like, wedding tree that they planted and it's just dead and dying. And she's just thinking about all of these things that she wished she had her husband for, and just, it feels painful.
There's all these little things, too, like, throughout the story, whenever she's doing something and she just stops for a second and realizes, like, he used to do this, or he used to be here, or... this isn't getting done because Ephron's no longer here.
And not to bring this down a little bit, but in spoiler alert for my life, during this book, I had just been burying my brother, and it definitely...
resonated.
It resonated. Like, it was very much like I felt and understood why these characters...
exactly what they were going through.
And sorry if that got a little heavy there for a moment, but
personal things are very. I mean, it's good to know that, like, if it resonated with you and you've lost someone close like that, that means they handled it. Like, it's a testament to how well they handled it.
That's why I was just kind of like that. That's why one of the things I wanted to praise the most about this book was like it definitely has that resonant feel with that.
They handled that really well, and also again, for me, the bigger thing was the changing society.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I've read a ton of stories about how, like, oh, society is changing, maybe it's degrading a little bit, you feel like the politicians aren't doing what you want them to, you feel like things are corrupt.
Kind of like Game of Thrones, like, you just see, like, the country slowly degrading a little bit.
The thing about Game of Thrones is because it's told from the perspective of a bunch of, like, kings and princes and stuff, you really get this feeling like, this exists because they choose to make it exist and they can alter it. This is like, you're a merchant living in the society, and the government's doing something you don't care about, and you're helpless against it.
It's like the Revolutionary War. We were just
I mean, even like right now, there's this sense of like, the economy downturns, and what can you do?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're just one trader in millions of people. Like, there's so much at work, and I feel like it captures that sense of dealing with change and dealing with like the government, dealing with society, and getting older, especially with it. Again, this captured that in the same way that it captures loss. And I think that's, going back to Kyle, one of the reasons it annoys me so much, because I feel like you didn't have to have an antagonist there.
Yeah.
You could have had, like, man versus society. There are antagonistic forces in the world already that it would have been much more enthralling to deal with. You could have had much more deeper themes in dealing with how do we struggle against this society. Because the thing about Kyle is, like, again, I don't understand why he's in charge. I don't understand why no one threw him overboard at any point. Like, even Winthrop, I'm surprised he didn't push him overboard. Or Vivacia, she has, like, no reason to love him. Like, at least Winthrop is like, yeah, he's my dad, even if he's enslaved me or whatever. But I'm surprised Vivacia didn't just, like, reach back and grab him and hurl him into the sea.
I mean, admittedly, there is that, but I do like the idea that he did, I just thought up, that he is pretty much the personification of that change, because he is all the things that book is talking about, the changing in society.
Yeah. And like I said, that's why I almost feel like it would have been better if he was, like, one of their debtors, or related to one of their debtors, or if they had been forced to give him the ship. This would have been better than them deciding to allow this change into their family.
But it is also kind of what's a parallel as to what's going on in the stupidly named Bingtown, in the sense that, like, a lot of these other traders are kind of trying to weasel in and are somewhat getting successful because they're spending enough money and they're putting enough effort into getting this done.
Yeah.
So that they're actually... So it kind of makes sense that a marriage could be a good parallel and, like, metaphorical way of doing that.
Yeah. Again, though, it just... That's the thing, like, Kefria loves Kyle, and Kyle, as far as I could tell, does actually really like Kefria. He didn't marry her just for the live ship.
Yeah. So that's, again, a redeeming quality.
I mean, I guess, but he also, like I say, he loves her, but at the same time, it's like, what was it? There's the big thing with Malta, who's another, like, annoying character, but she's, like, 12, so it's understandable. And she wants to go to the balls, and she wants to wear grown-up dresses, and she wants to flirt with all the men and everything. And Kyle is like, yeah, sure, let her go. And
Malta,
Kefria's like, she's 12. Like, you don't understand. And he's like, he basically turns to his wife. He's like, look, you were really frigid when I first met you, and it took forever. I almost gave up, to be honest, until you finally slept with me. I don't want her to turn out the same way. I say go let her get as much experience as possible.
And that's a good clicking moment for Kefria, where she's just like, oh, my husband's a chauvinist pig.
Yeah, that's the whole thing where she's like, our courtship was like my most favorite part, where I thought you were being slow and gentle and nice and everything. And he's like, oh, that torturous period of my life. He's like, I can't believe I ever kept my cool.
Yeah, he's a bit of a bro. He's not a bro. He's a bit of a, just like...
But, although calling him a bro makes it seem like he's our friend.
No, that's why I was kind of like trying to...
I am not friends with no Kyle!
With this Kyle, if you're a Kyle and you're listening to this channel, thank you again for staying this long.
Thank you for staying this long. I'm not gonna say that I hate you, but I definitely think less of you because of this character.
Oh,
this is
God.
I don't think I've ever hated a character. I remember because you started this before me, because you got the audiobook instantly, and mine had to arrive in the mail. And you called me to be like, Joe, there's this character, and I really hate him. And I'm like, well, are you supposed to hate him? You're like, yeah, he's kind of the antagonist. I'm like, well, they succeeded. And you were like, no, you don't understand. And so I went into this, I'm like, okay, how does this work out? And then I read it, I'm like, yeah, I don't love to hate this guy. I hate to hate him. He is just like, I'm having fun shitting on him here, but reading the book, I didn't. It's like every time you run into him, it's like, do I have to deal with this asshole again?
That's why I'm excited for the next book, just to be like, he is no longer in a position of power. He is going to have everything taken away from him. We might get some actual related, like, some growth from him.
Maybe. Or maybe he'll just be a grumpy asshole until the day he dies.
If he does, then at least we gave him a chance.
I would not be surprised if, like, Winthrop won the ship over from the pirates and, like, became an accomplished captain, and then Kyle, like, retires, and he'd still be sitting there in a wheelchair, just be like, yeah, well, if you'd listened to me, things would have gone way better. Little punk-ass kid, you don't know shit about fuck, alright?
Yeah, hey, okay, Boomer.
He would just Kyle, the world's youngest boomer.
He's not just that, he's his own greatest generation.
Yeah, he's his own greatest generation. But yeah, I think, was there anything else you wanted to specifically?
Faith. The
The
meditation on faith that it has on there is really, really interesting.
Yeah, Winthrop's struggle with faith and everything
in
the face of Kyle. I can understand how someone would not believe in God if they had to deal with him.
Joe's come to God moment was Kyle for this.
God, if you exist, how can you let someone like exist? I don't understand. Saw would not allow this. No, that's one of the things I think I mentioned earlier. I'm like, the world building feels kind of inconsistent. They go to a lot of different ports and they go to a lot of different taverns, and like every tavern feels exactly the same. And maybe I'm spoiled by Wheel of Time, where like every city they go to feels like it has its own distinct culture. You go to Tyr, and they're like, oh, it's muddy everywhere, and people are wearing these shoes that have, like, little wooden planks on them so they don't track mud everywhere, and they, like, hang them by the door, and, like, oh, it's so humid here, they don't have fireplaces, and there's these little details and everything that make the world feel alive. And here it's like, yeah, every dockside bar is pretty much just a bar.
Clearly you've never been a sailor. Yeah. That's pretty much just, like, every dock.
As if you've been a sailor.
Shut up.
Clearly you've been.
Yes, I've been on this. You know, I feel like you comment in the comments if you want. Just if you.
Yeah, or same thing. Like even when you get to the cities, it's like, yeah, Jamila, the big capital, like it has some big buildings and there's a lot more slaves around. But again, it's like I didn't feel like the culture was like very different. They weren't greeted differently. They didn't really get things.
You didn't really get a chance to see.
It would have been interesting if like they got somewhere and they were like, "Oh, Sinden's illegal here. Like if they find you with it, you'll be kicked out." Or like booze is illegal or something like that. Or they'd be like, "Oh, when you go here, make sure you take off your shirt. They don't think men should be wearing shirts." Something. All the towns kind of felt like samey, or just like different cities on the same place instead of these things that were like months of voyages apart.
Yeah.
But the religion felt like one of the best realized religions I've seen,
and
especially for like a monotheistic religion.
And they like, other than through Winthrop's like meditations on it, they really didn't go much into it too, which is really interesting.
Well, I mean, Winthrop's like one of the main characters, and he does meditate a lot on it and stuff like that.
Yeah, but he talks about like little things, but he never gets into like the meat and chunks of said religion. Like they talk about the 36 contradictions of Saw.
Yeah, they don't mention all 36 of them. But that's kind of why it feels so fleshed out, because almost every other religion I've read about in fantasy books, they're either like, here's our deity, here's what he believes, here's like 3 traits about him, and like that's it. And like Saw's a much more complex like deity. They mention things where they're like, oh yes, men pray to Saw the father and women pray to Saw the mother because Saw encompasses all things. When Winthrop meets, he goes into the town and they worship another religion,
like
some
serpent god,
serpent deity he mentions, and he's like, oh, they worship this, and he sees it as this serpent is just one of the many faces of Saw.
Yeah. Because
Saw is everything. Like, you worship one aspect of him, but you're not seeing the whole picture. The fact that it's so multifaceted.
It's really, really well done. I was talking more about, like, Winthrop's struggle with his faith in the sense that, like, of dealing with Kyle, with all of this hardship, and, like...
And that's the reason why that works, is because the religion is so great. I've seen some other stuff where they try to, like, you know, oh, it's testing my faith in the drowned god or whatever. It's like, I never felt like you had a whole lot of faith, mostly because it's hard to have faith in someone who's just like, drown your enemies, love the sea. Like, that's very, very basic commandments. Like, Saw has 36 commandments, and some of them are contradictions.
Yes.
But you must understand that all things are part of Saw.
Yeah, that's it. reminds me of my faith in senses. Like, there's like, oh, this book has a lot of contradictions. It's like, nah, it has a lot of contradictions, but those contradictions actually overlap into each other. But that's an entire thing. If you want to see a review of the Bible, I can go down with it. But that's not what this is about.
Even as someone who doesn't have, like, a whole lot of faith myself, I really found it compelling, the fact that, like, he wants to do the right thing, he wants to follow his religion, even in the face of all these things. Even though I don't have, like, faith, I still have convictions. I have beliefs that I believe to be true. And I try to stick to them in the face of hardships and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, specifically, I have a lot of feelings about, like, economics and money and, like, advertisements and their role in society, where I don't want to advertise stuff on these videos and everything. But now that I'm getting emails from, like, Raid Shadow Legends being like, oh, we'll give you $4,000 to do, like, a 30-second spot, and I'm like, that's a lot of money! Like, I could just do one spot, maybe. That would, I don't know.
Welcome to the Big Town Traders, Joe.
Welcome to the Big Town. But what I'm saying, though, is I get that, I really got that from this, where he, like, you know, he doesn't want to lie.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pirates are like, yeah, we just lie and joke to each other all the time. And he's like, I can't get into that because it's not true. You're saying things, you're being mean to each other, even if it's in a joking way. You're still being mean. He's like, and I don't want to do that.
But then he also sees the corruption of said, like, stability and that stuff, like, with the priest that led the slave rebellion.
Yeah.
Where that guy is clearly in the wrong.
Well, that's another thing that's interesting about the way they handle the religion, is that just kind of like regular religions, you have Winthrop, who is the priest, who knows everything about it, and then you have all these people who are just like, thank Sa that was over, and that's like their extent of their religion, is like, yeah, they think Sa watches over them, they couldn't tell you any of the contradictions, they probably haven't read the holy book or whatever, but they're like, oh yeah, praise Sa.
Also, really cool thing about the priests is that they don't strive to be like, I know more than everybody else. They seek to be closer to Sa.
Yeah.
They just want to live with him or her.
They see the beauty in life. Sa, whatever, Sa's everything.
Yeah.
Sa is life, and you could see the beauty in life by helping people, basically helping more people to see Sa. And they do have this good sort of like, I forget the name of the psychologist. I think it was Jung, who had, Maslow, with the self-actualization pyramid, where he's like, yeah, you have these hierarchy of needs you need to meet. You have to think about food first, and before you have food, like, nothing else matters. You will be as immoral and as corrupt, like, you will not think about love if you don't have food. And then once you have food, then it's like social relationships, and then I forget exactly the hierarchy, but self-actualization is the top, where it's like, when all your, like, physical and social and mental needs are met, then you can focus on, how do I become a good person? And Winthrop has this feeling about, like, all the strife in the world is caused by poor people who don't have food, and thus can't take time to appreciate Sa because they're too busy trying to survive. Or these people who get so caught up in their greed that they don't realize, like, oh, yeah, I could just appreciate what I have, what Sa has blessed me with, and everything. And I really liked it. But anyway, you had one more thing you wanted to say about the serpents before we get out of here.
Like, the serpents themselves, again, like I said earlier in this video, I feel like they were very tacked on part of it, but the stuff that they did talk about was really intriguing. And earlier today, you told me this really interesting theory that you had. Oh yeah,
that they hinted at some stuff. Because the serpents, they come to be chasing down the live ship. The serpents have these weird, vague memories of a time from before, and one of the serpents seems to think that Vivacia, the live ship, is she who remembers, which is something of some prophecy, but they can't remember the prophecy because they're like thousands of years old or something like that.
Yeah.
You get this idea that they're like ancient.
This has been something that's going on longer than this story.
And they're talking some big cycle or something of death and rebirth. And when Vivacia doesn't have Winthrop on her, when she has no one of the blood, she says she can start to remember, like, things from before she was a ship, vague hintings of memories. And then she realizes there are serpents below her, and she keeps like, the serpents are trying to talk to me. Yeah. And they don't know if she's just freaking out and imagining things because she's so distressed, or if there's something there. But the fact that the serpents are saying, like, it's she who remembers, makes me think there is a link. So, another thing that they don't mention a lot, especially you wouldn't be able to tell from here. Sorry, I pointed to the cover. I forgot we're on a podcast for a second. The cover shows a big wooden ship, but when you're following the serpents, they talk about following a big silver hull, which makes me think that wizard wood is more like metal than wood. Maybe it has planks or whatever, but that would explain why it doesn't rot. It doesn't do all these other things.
From what they described, it always seemed more like, if you remember the Lord of the Rings, the staff that Gandalf had, it was made out of wood, but was this very, like, sheared off. It seemed like this one piece of granite it even looked like. That's what I kind of pictured. Very, like,
it could be more like a rock or whatever than wood. Rock or metal or something like that. Yeah, but either way, it's not quite regular wood.
Mm-hmm.
And they also mention, well, Athena's on that island, they find, like, a rock shaped like a dragon or something.
Yeah.
And they mention, like, oh, there used to be dragons and everything. So, my idea, because everything is sort of connected, is that there were dragons, the dragons eventually died, and their bones are what wizard wood is. Like, their petrified bones are being carved up and used to make these ships and everything. And I could see, like, the shape of a ship is maybe sort of the shape of a giant rib cage or something, perhaps, turned on its back. And the serpents are basically like dragon tadpoles. Like, they let them into the water, and then they have a 1,000-year development cycle, and then at some point they grow wings or sprout legs and go back on land and retake the land. And they're connected to the wizard wood because it's like the ancient parts of them.
The only issue with that is that, well, it might be because they're not dealing with the wizard wood as much or anything like that. They are, at the end of the book, you find out, going feral.
Yeah.
They're just becoming more of the beasts that they thought that they were.
They're becoming more beasts, they're losing their ability to communicate and stuff like that. But again, that could be some sort of, like, metamorphosis. You go into a cocoon and then you emerge as a dragon or something.
But yeah, that was your theory, and if you think that's a really cool theory, then comment in the comment. If you've read the books before,
yeah, if you've read these before, let us know what did you think about everything. I did have one other theory I didn't mention before. That this is post-apocalyptic.
Mm-hmm.
That whatever the Rainwild traders are doing is actually some kind of scientific thing, like it's plastic or something that was built. And the reason why they have all the deformities is because of radiation.
All right, Joe, I appreciate that, but not every story is Wheel of Time. Not every story is a post-apocalyptic of a post-apocalyptic of a post-apocalyptic.
But it might be. You never know.
You were just so jazzed for that, aren't you?
No, it's just they mentioned before that there was like some kind of city that the Rainwild traders know, like the ancient ruins.
Oh, yeah.
They mentioned it briefly in passing, which makes me think like, oh, there was a big city that had some huge thing, and now they're basically scrapping parts of it, and they're growing tumors, which makes me think they got some sort of weird radiation thing, and the magic isn't magic, it's technology.
I can understand that.
So there's another option. I don't know. Either way, I think that's about enough for now. I gotta go record something else anyway. Oof. So we're cutting it short, but I hope you enjoyed this. Let us know, again, if you read this, what did you think about it? Next month, we're gonna be looking at the next two Wheel of Time books. I wasn't planning to come back to it. We did the first two, and I was kind of like, this is a weird mixed bag. I continued reading. I read the next two, Book 3, The Dragon Reborn, and Book 4, The Shadow Rising. I read both of those. Brandon has not. He didn't finish the first book.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to be coming in and just basically talking about those, because the Wheel of Time has gone from something that I like barely finished the first book to being like one of my favorite fantasy series. And I find the journey that it took to be extremely interesting, something worth talking about. And I mentioned a little bit here, I felt that Ship of Magic felt really like a prequel.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things I was struck by once I got to the third and fourth book, where everything from the first book started being reincorporated.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, the first book reads like a prequel. And I'm really curious if you could start on book 3 and 4 and just skip the first two. And just like go into it with those, because they reintroduce the characters at the start of every book.
Mm-hmm.
They re-explain a bunch of stuff. There's an appendix in the back. I couldn't find anyone willing to do that for the show, but if there's anyone out there interested in reading, if you think you could get through book 3 and 4, if you're interested to try, even just going into book 3 and going into it blind without having read the first two, I would love to hear about that. Put some questions in the comments. If you're part of the Discord, put questions there. or just not questions, but your thoughts about it. I would love to get that for the next episode. See if anyone could do that to test my theory.
All right.
So we'll look forward to that. By the way, one final thing I should mention. I feel like this is like the 8th ending. We're doing the Lord of the Rings podcast.
And then the Shire folk.
Yeah, I do want to mention that we do have a Patreon. It's actually the Hardleg Gaming Patreon. That's my main channel. If somehow you made it here and you didn't know that. You could check that out. If you donate $1, not only does it support the show, help us continue to do this, but you can get access to my Discord. I actually have a book club room there just for discussing books, discussing the podcast, upcoming things, and you can leave questions and stuff for the books we're in the process of reading, and hopefully get those questions answered on the podcast, get those discussion points discussed, I guess, for lack of a better word. Anyway, thanks again for coming. Thanks to Brandon for being my gracious co-host.
That'd be me. Thank you very much for reading, guys.
Yep. And until next time, fuck. I had an outro before, and now I forgot what it was. We should have looked it up beforehand. Either way, stay jazzy, San Francisco.